My name's Kevin Lyman, and welcome to the My Warped Life podcast. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Tony Aratia.
That's me, Tony Aratia. You have to roll those R's.
And my background, as a lot of people know, was I've been in the music business for 40 years. I was best known for creating the Vans Warped Tour. I worked on Lollapalooza. I worked in the clubs of L.A. for 13, 14 years, doing 320 years. But, Tony, a lot of the people that might be listening to this may not know your background.
Well, the only reason why I'm here really is because I golf with Kevin.
I thought it was for the ribs.
It's for the ribs, absolutely. It's for your barbecue. No, we met through a mutual friend, and it wasn't that long ago. So not having the experience of being on the Warped Tour allows me a unique insight of asking a lot of questions that people otherwise wouldn't ask that generally surround you. So we met through Tony Palermo, a dear friend of mine who's the drummer of Papa Roach.
Yeah, he's the drummer of Papa Roach, who was on Warped Tour.
Right.
And I think Tony played in a few other bands that might have drifted in and out of that parking lot at some point. And I met him in front of the hardware store one day. And we looked at each other because we're in such transient relationships in this business that sometimes you look at people and you think you know them, and then it dawned on us who we were. And he told me you guys played golf right down the street on Wednesdays, and the mistake he made was by inviting me to come over, and now you find yourself.
Now I'm hanging out with you more than I hang out with him.
I know. We miss Tony.
No, we miss Tony.
We miss Tony a lot.
But it's in that time where we started talking and we started to getting to know each other. I mean, we had a lot in common. I've been in entertainment for many, many years, and in the unique position that I have is building recording studios and building huge broadcast workflows and feature film finishing workflows. And I also have a website on my own, which is called homegrownhits.com, where people in 110 countries around the world are trying to upload their home recorded music and try and make a hit song.
Yeah, that's all real cool and everything, but how did you really break in the entertainment business?
I was a dancer. Yes, I danced for years. Equity, musical theater. Hello. That's why I'm here.
Yes, and you have a great laugh, so we'll play well on this podcast. But this podcast is going to explore 40 years of my history. I've drifted through thousands of people with their own unique warped lives. And we hope to tell a lot of stories and have a lot of fun because...
A lot of the stories, it wasn't fair to just have these stories on the golf course. And I immediately said, look, stop talking. Get in front of a mic because there are amazing things that you've experienced over the years. And I still have questions.
But if I ever stop talking, I can't hit a golf ball. It's the only way I can hit a golf ball is if I continue to talk through it.
So I'm really looking forward to getting on from one episode to the next because some of the subjects that you're tackling are all kind of based on a theme, and it wraps around your experiences and stories that, frankly, blow my head off.
Yeah, we're going to take themes, like bus drivers, and we're going to take themes like food, and we're going to take some of the idiosyncrasies and things I've learned through the business on how to tweak the business to fit some of my business models that have most of them have worked and some haven't.
And there's these things that you had to deal with. I mean, it was a punk rock skateboard tour. So there was very unconventional ways to make this thing happen. And the experiences that you had to get to where you were, to where it had a brand, it had an idea where people knew what the Warped Tour was, and it was unique from anything else.
But as in everything, there was many years before that molded those decisions by observing others. When we put this together, I said, we have to go out and get some interviews of people. So instead of just interviewing one guest, Tony, we'll be splicing in a lot of different people into our episodes to help tell this story. On our first episode, we have Chris Shiflett, who was in No Use for a Name.
Amazing.
And went on, and he's now in the Foo Fighters. We have Jennifer Finch, who is in L7 and continues to be in L7. We have my old friend Gus Brandt, who was a road manager for the artist Seaweed. Later went on to road manage Eminem on the Warped Tour, and then went on to be the Foo Fighters road manager and now manages Mark Hoppus. And then I went out and said, what would be something about what I did without talking to the fans? So we reached out through my social media. You can follow me at, it's always Kevin Lyman at Twitter, Kevin Lyman at Instagram. I'll be reaching out to people for different information and have them as guests on the show too. So our guest for this episode is a gentleman named Jon Smith. He was 15 years old when he went to the first show. He went to the first show in Salt Lake City, and he's turned into a DJ in Salt Lake City and continues to be a DJ. And an old friend, Tazy, who was a person who had a ska parade. He was a person who kept ska music alive in California, and he'll be a guest on today's show.
So, when you first said to me that you were going to be able to interview Chris, and I was excited because I'm like a huge Foo Fighter fan, but I didn't realize, how close people got on tours and how well you knew him. And so when you first got on tour and the band that he was on, what did you tell him the tour was? I mean, what was the plan?
Well, the interesting thing with Chris was he was in a band called Green Thumb. That was I'd met him out at my house. Me and my wife lived in a log cabin basically out in Claremont. I guess we'd met out there. And then he was in the band No Use for a Name, which was kind of a cool punk band that was within the scene. We kind of knew each other. And when I was talking to Chris, we were trying to come up with a name. And back then, you had to pay like $400 for a name search. You couldn't just Google something. And then he recalled, and he actually brought something else about the name that I hadn't even known.
I feel like it was almost like right away, or maybe even before I joined No Use, that they were already talking to you about doing that tour. And I remember that originally it was called Pangea. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. It was Pangea. And then I was going to go with a bomb. And then the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And then it became Warped because, I had, Warped magazine with Transworld. So I borrowed that name. Because I couldn't afford any more name searches. But you got to Pangea. That's right.
That's awesome, Pangea. It was so worldly of you.
Yeah, I mean, those were probably my hippie roots coming out in Claremont. And it was
so what was the other one that was bombed and then the Oklahoma City bombing hit?
There was a term that everyone kind of used back then. Like, that's the bomb. Like,
the bomb.
The bomb. So the tour, I thought that'd be cool.
I am so glad that didn't work out because that is lame.
That would have been, both of them probably would have not worked out. Probably Pangea would have got confused.
Pangea would have probably turned into some kind of world music thing.
Yeah, and Fish would have probably been on it at one point. But then, it was like, and then the bomb, and literally it was the morning that we were going to announce the tour, the Oklahoma City bombing happened, that tragedy. And I was going, that's probably, and then.
So how did it get to Warp? I mean, what was the aha moment?
Well, then at I was just thinking also with the bomb, the tour didn't do that well the first year. So it would have been known in the industry as the bomb. And then, we were, and the Warped, it was my friend, Fran Richards from Transworld Publications, had skateboarding and surfing magazines. Yeah. And we'd done all these events in the snow and charity events. And that's about building relationships, It was one of those things that when I approached him, I says, you have a magazine. It was called Warped Magazine. You can still get a copy of it in Tokyo. Just like you can go to Tower, you can go to Tower Records in Tokyo.
Well, you can still buy Vans too.
Vans, of course, you can get Vans around the world now. But it is an interesting thing where we borrowed the and I was when we were in Tokyo last year with Warped Tour. I picked up a copy of the magazine. It's a nice magazine.
Is it really? That's cool.
So the name was so we kind of settled on this name Warped, and we were able to use the name, Chris said, and I told him I had no more money to get any more name searches. We had to get out on the road, and we kind of all of a sudden, it was like I wanted to do it differently, and a lot of people were thinking, was I just trying to do Lollapalooza? Someone actually said, what's he trying to do? Duplicate Lollapalooza. I remember hearing that, and I was like, no, I'm trying to do something. This was technically going to be the last time I did something.
Warped is a completely 360 from Lollapalooza. It's just a different feel. It's a different vibe, and thank God for it. It obviously caught on to a niche of a groove for hundreds of thousands of kids across this country and around the world.
So we had to it came together quick, and it was interesting because it was like we had to go. So I said, my first one, let's all share tour buses. And
that's the question I have for you. The first one. Let's be honest. My first, time at anything. We can go on and on with analogies. How was the first one? Can you tell us what it was really like?
Well, I think I'd like to blend in some of these people. I went to them. For me, I was like, everything's an adventure. So I'm like, okay, it was short time, so we had to go find some bands that believed in it, and Quicksand and Orange 9mm from the East Coast were managed by a person. But you might want to go back. It was like, they moved very quickly. When, the original, I had a friend that was talking to me about doing the 5 for 5. The secret was 5 for 5 bands. He wanted me to
Right.
help. I was always producing things for other people.
Right.
And I went to a guy named Les Borsai and told him, no, I want to do this thing with Action Sports. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting in front of a lawyer's house up in the Hollywood Hills on a hot day, just sitting on the curb. And it should have been an indication I should have ran when he made us sit in the hot sun for about an hour waiting for this meeting. And it moved very quickly. And, you know, CAA got involved. It was great to have them involved because they were also a agency that didn't really have any bands that could have probably gone on the tour. There was a lot of punk rock agents, but I wanted to kind of have a fresh start. So we started approaching bands about this first tour. So I think we should, you know, maybe hear from some of those bands, you know, about their first, you know, going on
What
that
their
first tour.
experience was like. I mean, because I'm sure it was Lear jets and it was, you know, suites at the top, the Hyatt, that kind of stuff.
No, it's let's go and hear what Chris Shiflett said, because I actually had bands touring with each other, sharing buses.
One of the funniest memories for me of that first year of the Warped Tour was before, you know, when it was still just kind of in the planning stages. I remember I called you one day and I was like, hey man, do you know where we're going to be staying? Like what kind of hotels we're going to be at on this thing? Like, cause I kind of want to bring my running shoes. I remember that. And you just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I was like, what? Whoops. I guess I'm being presumptuous here, but, which is funny in hindsight. Cause, you know, we didn't stay in hotels. We were just like this, you know, we were like pirates, you know, pirate ship.
Which kind of led into that whole, you know, my concept was, you know, to kind of keep the cost down for everyone, you would be sharing a bus with someone.
Yeah.
And who was that someone that you were, it was more like an assigned, like a summer camp. You didn't really have much say who you were traveling with, you know?
No, we were with L7. I mean, first off, just to step back from that for a second, like just to be on a bus, dude, was like, you know, that was like such an incredible luxury. That was my first bus experience and my last bus experience for touring a bus, you know? So to be on a bus was amazing, especially on a tour like that where you're covering so much ground. But our bus was really funny because it was us and L7, and we didn't have a huge crew. We had a couple people with us, and they just had a couple people with them. But then, do you remember there were like 3 inline skaters?
Oh,
I think they were all Australian somehow.
Yeah, Tom Fry, who unfortunately has passed away since, was on your
geez,
bus.
I didn't know that.
And Renee, like the redhead, the big redhead Viking guy, kind of, you know. He was on the bus, but inline skater. And it was a mix because it was like we were trying to make skateboarding and inliners get along. It was my idea that everyone could be on the same ramp, you know.
I just remember all of us claimed all the bunks, and the inline skaters were like just sort of stuffed in the cracks. Like you'd get up in the morning, there'd be like inline skaters on couches and on the floor and stuff. But do you remember, you know what sticks out about that bus? Do you remember, and it's funny because I didn't care about this at all at the time because I didn't really know anything about country music, but the guy that drove our bus was this older dude, and I'm pretty sure that he had been like something like Ray Price's bus driver for years, or something like that. And like now, here's the funny part is that guy fucking hated us. He was just like, oh my God, like it must have been a low point in his bus driving career to have all these assholes just making a mess and making a rag. It was just, you know, it's mayhem like every single day. And he hated us. And he would like, if you left your shoes in the hallway, he'd hide them. So you'd like get up the next day and the first thing you'd have to do before you went out and figured out where breakfast and coffee was you'd have to like find your shoes, and they'd be like, you know, like in one of the bays in a box, like stuffed all the way in the back. You know, it wasn't like on accident. You know what I mean? He would like hide your shoes. But now, you know, like I love country music now. Like now, if I was on that guy's bus, I'd just sit up front with him and ask him stories about Ray Price all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the time, I was like, we were just at war, you know?
No. The guy hid his shoes. Fuck that guy.
No, that's what you do on a bus if you lay them out. If you leave your stuff out on a tour bus.
No, of course. Could you
notorious.
imagine this guy on the bus being, you know, he's got a job, he's got this thing, and he's got a bunch of punk rock. They were 20, they were 21, 22.
Yeah, it was the first time out. But so you teach people on a bus, and that's, you know, we'll explore. We'll do a
that's
whole
interesting.
episode on this.
You know, that's the other thing, too, that you had to for the last 25 years. I mean, it didn't change for you, grew, and you got older. You were kind of a father figure. You taught these people how to act proper.
Well, you know, touring, you know, there's an etiquette to touring.
There has to be, or you'll kill each other.
There has to. And living on a bus with 12 people, That's a normal bus, but we actually on this tour had buses up to 24. And even these buses
Wow.
that were meant for 12 had 15, 16 people because it's a funny little bit, but people stowed away on the first Warped Tour. We
What?
We all met in a parking lot the first time. And, Greg Teal, my friend, has a little, observation of that first time how we all left. It was more like a summer camp.
Was it in Claremont at the old warehouse?
At the old warehouse down on Arrow Highway, yeah.
Yeah. And I want to say it was in the evening time. And we kind of like divided everybody up into buses. And that's kind of how we left.
Yeah.
We loaded up the trucks that day and then got on the buses and hit the road.
And we literally left, and then we drove and stopped up in Vegas at the Rio for a buffet.
Yeah.
And then we realized we had a lot of extra people. People had stowed away on that tour.
So, like, the liability issue of that, I mean, I imagine some of these are
really
kids
thinking about
that stow
liability
away.
at 1995. We'll talk a little bit about later about liability and lawsuits and what all the reasons why we had to make insurance. But this first year, it was kind of like
Seat of your pants.
If you were willing to stow away and jump on with a backpack and go on a tour, I gave you a lot of props. Like, it was that's just who I was.
Did you put them to work?
A lot of them were skaters.
And then, I mean, were they kids that were stowing away?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, they were all, we were all, I was 32 when I started the Warped Tour, so everyone, and I was like probably the elder statesman on the tour at that point.
Of course.
At 32. So,
But they were just kind of following the party, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that was
they
the
just
thing.
had heard about this thing. And, at that point, just jump on a bus, it was interesting because, L7, Jennifer, they'd come off some pretty big tours. They'd been on Lollapalooza the previous year. They had toured with REM, and Jennifer had some great insights about, that first year. How did you make it through that first year?
I threw lots of tantrums, challenged you, started yelling at you. It was like, I'm hungry, Kevin, feed me.
And
Be eating. I mean, we got scrappy, we tried to do I think that like one of the challenges, and this is more on the end, like your end of it, was rolling up to a venue in the middle of the night, not knowing where we were and not having transportation to just either arrange to have food come in or toiletries or tampons or toothbrushes, like showing up and running out of these things and then figuring out, I'm going to use a fancy word, logistics. We were like learning logistics as we were going and coming from, one of the things is L7 has always been like, we got to a certain point. We had been touring for 7 to 10 years at that point. The band formed in 1986. We started touring regularly in 88. We were minors. I was a minor when I started playing, and we had to be able to develop systems to just get our basic needs met, like showering or clean underwear or clean socks. And bringing in like Lollapalooza to the Warped Tour, there was a whole new level of logistics. And I know it's probably not fascinating to anyone listening, but I find it all very fascinating, like how it worked. And I have such admiration for you that you found these, I want to call them empty spaces, like underutilized spaces, and created energy in them, like the loading docks of big venues. And like one of the funnest things that I remember was we were able to say that we were playing these big amphitheaters, like these big old amphitheaters, but what we were really playing was the parking lot. And that was like
one concourse. I know, like in Camden, New Jersey, it was like the one concourse.
No, I'm sure that changed over the years, but that first year was really, you were like, it was almost like a communal thing.
And that's really where we were trying to kind of start that essence of a community. And L7 got it. They were a band I'd worked with a lot.
Yeah, because there are other bands who be like, no, I'm good. We'll see you, bye.
Yeah, absolutely. Warped it was all the way through all those years. It wasn't for everyone. But those were the bands that kind of knew me from before. So,
right.
So it almost like they supported me by knowing me from before. And that's what I tell people all the time, that you should, you want to make sure that, people always say, hey, I want to start a festival or that. I go, I was allowed to fail pretty much. I had enough of a background to fail.
You kept failing until you succeeded, so that's not really a fair statement.
Well, it was really 1 year. I mean, by year 2, we'll talk about that later on. We were doing okay. But that first one, and it was interesting for people like for like Jennifer and people to be on that show, because I really hold a great spot in my heart because they took a risk that first year. I was lucky enough to catch up with our good friend, Gus Brandt, and he has some reflections of that first year.
Didn't he manage Eminem too, right?
No, he was road managed Eminem.
He road managed.
He was a road
Eminem.
manager for Eminem. He did Seaweed. He was with a band called Seaweed, and he has a little bit of an insight about them on the first
right.
tour.
That'd be cool.
They were friends of mine from, once again, playing Pensacola. Like, they came through and we would go to the same like old lady buffets. They just loved it here because it was so weird, like Tacoma, where they're from. And I came off of this REM tour with Belly and flew straight to Tacoma or Seattle and drove straight down to Salt Lake City.
Yeah, and so you're coming up, and touring with REM and opening out of Belly. You're an act who was playing in arenas and large venues with dressing rooms and things. And that day, you showed up in Salt Lake City. That was, probably maybe a little bit of an awakening. But you were always that calm. You come up in a lot of conversations as very even keeled and calm.
Oh,
and
nice.
And when you showed up at that first show, I think probably was maybe a little bit of a sticker, like a shock to you, maybe just a little bit of what it was going to be like.
Yeah, I mean, our advance was like, "Hey, Kevin, we'll be there tomorrow at 4 on,
the show day."
It wasn't. Yeah, we'll just be there. We'll be there when you need us. We'll stay out of your way. And I didn't know what to expect, and I remember, the Warped Tour, the first one, food being like the most precious thing. It was almost like a Hunger Games type thing, like just struggling and not, and everyone just like broed down, and they're, you put people. And bands were sharing buses, and Seaweed were only on 80% of the tour. Like dropped off at the end, and so we had our own bus, and it was just the best bus $1.95 could buy. I used to tell Seaweed that if I caught them hanging out with Sublime, they were fine. They're per diem. Like you don't get your $10. Those guys are scary. Stay away.
No, that is amazing. When you think about it, they were all young. They were all very young kids. That would have been the best time of their life. 21, 22 people on the bus. Okay, I can understand after 6 months.
But they had that touring experience. But then I brought this band called Sublime on the tour with us. And on Sublime, I remember getting Sublime's cassette demo originally. And I started working with them around Los Angeles, and we had done some shows at ski resorts at one point with the Offspring, No Doubt, and Sublime. But, there were always like this kind of train wreck. And I'm sure we could do a whole episode on Sublime stories, just like we will about Fletcher stories at some point of this. Fletcher.
I saw, I did some research on this, and I think it was, I Googled 95 Warped Tour, No Doubt. And you saw Gwen up there dancing on stage. And then Sublime came on with his dog, completely out of his mind. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, but you can see that footage. There's so many documentary footage on YouTube of some of these things. I heard you talking about it to me on a story, but until I actually saw the video of how crazy it got out there, I was like, wow.
Yeah, I think Chris had we'll touch on a little bit of a Chris story about Sublime. I had kicked someone off the tour, and you wouldn't, it wouldn't be right to not talk about Sublime that first year.
Ah, yes.
We haven't really mentioned Sublime in this episode, but I always had a soft spot for that band, and Brad Noel, I think, rest his soul, would have been. I think he would have been he would have been mind blowing what he would have produced and written over time.
For sure.
But yeah, what were your recollections of them that first year?
I mean, they were such great guys, and not just them, but everybody that worked with them too. I mean, I just remember them being so warm and fun to be around. And obviously, we could talk at length about all the partying. I mean, everybody was partying, and that was, that was just around, and and it's sort of everybody was doing that. So it didn't seem like, you know, in light of how Brad died later on, you know, it didn't seem like out of step with what everybody else was doing. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I remember some crazy shit too. Like I remember watching, I think it was Brad and the drummer like getting a fist fight, like either right after a set or right before a set, you know, that sort of thing, and still playing the show. And
I think that was up at Melody Fair, up outside of Buffalo. They got in a fight in the mud. Remember the fans throwing mud at them, and then they got it. That was when they got the fist fight in the parking lot. Yeah. So,
and I remember that they brought their Dalmatian on that tour, and the Dalmatian would like bite people and like had like really bad gas or something. Like I remember like it really. I think the funniest part was that they were on a bus with a vegan hardcore band, which is like the greatest thing, like an East Coast vegan hardcore band matched up with Sublime, and then there's their crazy dog. And I remember at one point, somebody wrote, you know, no human food on the dog's head, like in Sharpie, so that people would stop feeding. Feeding it, you know.
So, you know, it was interesting, Tony, because it was like a love-hate relationship with me and that dog, to be honest.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Lou Dog, you can't blame him. I mean, he grew up in a
it's a dog, but you don't bring a dog on tour, do you?
The dog was not allowed to come on. There was a deal I had with the band before we left on the road.
Right.
No dog and no friends. Like, no dog and no friends.
And Sublime, just check those. No dog? Nope. We got the dog. Let's check. Well, hey, guys, you want to come on?
They didn't actually bring the dog at the beginning of the tour. We got to Asbury Park, and we'd been struggling. Like, you know, we're just getting across the country. You know, we were having venues canceled and moving to smaller venues. We were constantly just getting down the road. We got to Asbury Park, and we actually had a pretty good show. We had a solid show.
Right.
And I was feeling good, but they decided to fly their dog in, and I think their friends brought them a bunch of drugs, to be honest. And we played the Stone Pony, kind of a famous venue.
Right.
You know, if you know
Very
Bruce
famous.
Springsteen,
Yeah,
the history of the venue. We played in the parking lot, and behind it was this like gay cowboy bar. So at the end of the night, we all decided like, hey, let's go party at the bar. And here comes the dog and the friends. And within 10 minutes, the dog had bit 2 people. And we kind of got out of town. We went up to this Melody Fair. It was muddy. It was rainy. The band, but then before they got in the fist fight.
Was that at the bar they got in a fist fight?
No, they got the dog bit people, and then we laughed.
Okay. So it's like one of those things. Let's get on the bus. Let's go. He bit him. Let's go.
Get out of town. The cops
and you got a bunch of gay cowboys chasing after the bus down the parking lot.
So we went to Melody Fair, and in the morning, before we're just starting to get going. The dog had bit 2 people on skateboards.
Oh, geez.
And I went up to Brad, and I'm like, are you effing kidding me, man? I told you no dog. And what in hell is it bite? And he goes, well, you know, Kevin, he hates skateboarders. I go, we're on a skateboarding tour. And it was like, I was, you know, people don't realize that I wasn't sleeping. We're losing money. I'm worried about, like, will I have a home when I get back to California? You know, I left my, you know, wife and newborn child there. And I'm just hanging on. And I told him, like, do not, the dog must go. And the friends have to go because their friends were bad. Their friends at that point, most of them had grown up and doing all right. It was just a bad scene. And we went to Nassau Coliseum. I go downstairs. There's a box of cereal, 2 boxes of cereal for breakfast. There's, you know, food keeps coming up in all their conversations. And there's their friends eating 1 box of the food and the dog with a bowl and the other box of cereal. They're feeding the dog. And I lost it. And I kicked them. I said, you guys got to go. Like, you're taking 90% of my time is you, and you got to go. I always have a soft spot, though, and go, okay, you're kicked off until we got to Seattle. People didn't really realize that we drove from New York with only 1 show in between from there to Seattle.
What was the show?
We played in Milwaukee, so they really missed like 1 show.
Oh, okay.
And they couldn't even get into Canada anyhow. We had a Vancouver show, but legally they couldn't get in there because of all the legal shenanigans they were in. And, you know, but going back to that first show, I thought it was a great time to bring Jon Smith in because he was at the first show as a fan.
Right.
And I think that's really a...
Now, Jon Smith, isn't this the guy that is, I think he's Sacramento, right? That area?
No, Jon Smith is from Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake,
And
that's right.
He's a DJ.
And
up-
he's a DJ. He's got like a pretty successful show out there.
And he was super cool because he had the first flyer. He has a photo. He had the first flyer from the first
right
Warped
on.
Tour, and he shared that with me. And I found out I had done some interviews with him through the years, so it was very funny and almost reverse when I talked to him about his first experience. So from a fan's perspective, let's hear what Jon had to say.
So we lied to my parents and told them it was at night, and we ditched school because it was on a Friday.
Right.
And so we left school at lunch and drove out to Saltaire. And the first thing that struck me as we walked onto the Saltaire grounds was door show. Most of the that we'd been to, like I said, were like a basement restaurant, like old Mexican restaurants that had shut down for the night. But this was a full-scale thing. And I remember this was the first punk show that we'd been to that had more than one stage, right? Like I'd been to Lollapalooza before, and I'd been to like festival shows at the fairgrounds. But this was the first, like, with a skateboard ramp and people that were more along my newfound love of punk and hardcore. It's funny, like me and my friends, we had all just made the transition from grunge and alternative to punk rock, right? Like Green Day and Offspring were making the scene. So we'd all cut our hair off and, ditched the flannel shirts. And all of a sudden we were surrounded by people that were dressed and looked just like us, not at night, but in the daytime. And it was really cool. It was kind of a thing where it was like, okay, we knew then that this was something different, that this was something unique.
Which I mean, and growing up in Salt Lake City, I mean, the political climate towards punk rock necessarily, you guys were definitely kind of on the edge there. How were you kind of viewed, in the community in some ways? It might have been a little scary at times.
Yeah, a little. Like my dad worked for a company called TRW, which is in Hermosa Beach. So I got to go back and forth, and I'd heard of bands like The Descendants and Pennywise and Black Flag growing up. But I didn't really give them too much thought. Like I didn't appreciate it at the time. And then all of a sudden I'm seeing these bands that I'd seen and all of the older members of our group had always talked about. And all of a sudden it was kind of like, okay, this was like all starting to come together, right? All of a sudden it was, we had a scene, right? It wasn't just a bunch of nerdy kids skateboarding to downtown and trying to live up to their standards. All of a sudden we had our own thing. And I remember when Civ took on, we had to choose between Civ and Sublime. And we were like, okay, well, we're here to see Sublime, so we're going to check out Sublime, and they were terrible. Obviously, Bradley at the time was going through his stuff, and it was hard to watch. Even at 16, we were all kind of like, okay, I don't know what this is. This is, let's go check out this other band that's out on the beach. And Civ was playing like out on the beach of Saltaire.
Yeah. Little 1 foot stage, if I remember. It was like the stage was about 1 foot high. Yeah.
And this wasn't like to set the scene for listeners. This is not the Warped Tour that you think of when you hear the Warped Tour. This is like, I mean, there were maybe 200-300 people there. I mean, this was not the 50,000-60,000 people 7-stage Warped Tour that we all came to know and love. This was very much a prototype version of what came to change the scene. And I remember seeing Civ up there was our first experience with hardcore, and seeing Civ and Quicksand and these bands, and they were loud and they were fast and they were angry and it was just a whole new experience. And I remember seeing Walter from Quicksand at his booth. And when we were talking about it, we were like, oh, dude, man, this is something else. And Walter, I'll never forget this. Walter told me to check out his other band, as he put it, his other band, Gorilla Biscuits, right? One of the most legendary hardcore bands to ever come out of the music industry. And he's like, oh, yeah, you should check out my other band. You should. And he gave me a Quicksand T-shirt, which was amazing.
And that was kind of the thing, Tony, where, it was the sense of discovery, even back then. People maybe came for one band, saw a different band, kind of got turned on to a different genre of music. For me, it was like bringing all these bands that toured separately in clubs and starting to bring the sound together, because I was working every night of the week in the clubs, and I saw kids that if you brought them together, I thought this could actually become much bigger than clubs.
So when you consciously booked these bands, it wasn't just, okay, come on the tour, or just kind of haphazard. You really thought about the theme of what you wanted to do.
Well, the first year we had to convince people, like you had to go to your friends.
Hey,
and everything.
Come on this bus with 21 other people.
And we toured all the way around, but this was also a moment. We toured the country, and then towards the end of that tour, we had a band join us that went on to be one of the biggest bands, of that genre of music. A band named No Doubt, and Jen has some funny recollections of when No Doubt joined us on tour.
And and even then, if you look at some of the footage then of them on your tour, you could just see it. You could see that they were going to just be monstrous.
Well, we always knew they were going to be. Me and Paul Tollett with Golden Voice, they were always playing on ska bills. They were playing there was with you these 13, 14 band bills.
Right.
And it was and they were like, band 12,
Right.
And then they just kept moving more and more up. And I'd sit there and to be honest, I would look at it and you see this many times when a band is together and they have a female in the band.
Do you think a lot of it had to do with Jimmy Levine and when he started with them? Or
No. This is way before.
Right.
This is way before. Way before. So really what happened was it was kind of, and you see that in a process of a lot of times when you have a strong female singer. A lot of times they just want to be a member of the band.
Right.
But with that band, originally they kind of dressed up in clown suits. When some of the early shows, they were all kind of dressed in these suits, but you kind of knew that there was a star quality there.
Right.
I mean, Gwen was going to be a star. I knew it from the minute I'd be working in those clubs. I'd sit there, but we were not in a position like, I'm just
Sure.
I worked many, many nights. I saw bands. 4 bands. I worked 320 shows a year, so I saw hundreds of bands a year, and you just knew when someone had the star quality. But everyone has to get comfortable with that. You saw that later on with Paramore. You see that with artists that they have to get comfortable that there's going to be someone's going to step out. So it was very early in the career. They had not broken, but here's a.
But I would be curious from one band member recognizing another one on tour, especially a female's perspective of what it was like to not only tour with, but to see No Doubt.
Well, I don't know. Jennifer had a pretty good recollection of what she remembers them joining us.
I'm just going to tell you right now, my memories are my memories, but it literally seemed like the adults showed up on the tour. Like they were so well put together. And by the time we were just everyone, all of us, everyone was just falling apart at that point. Not falling apart in a bad way, but just like we had been doing it. Socks were dirty. We were past any issues. And then, what about needing a dressing room?
Well,
are you looking at us about? I remember Gwen Stefani. Was it Portland? I'm going to say like Portland was one of those rooms where we were in. It was like the actual shows were indoors and they were very small rooms. And there was a side dressing room and, we figured out like timing, who would get to use it. And I remember Gwen was just sitting there. We're all just putting on her makeup. She's like, how are you a woman in a band with 4 other women? Like it was just beyond her capacity, the amount of sharing that we had to do on that tour. And I loved her for that moment.
However, on that tour, Tony, there was one show that seemed to really stand out. And, it was, we played Salt Lake City.
Right.
A few hundred people there. The second show, we went to the intramural fields at the University of Colorado.
Okay.
And the promoter actually thought he canceled the show. So we're getting in his mode. And,
what time of year was
he
this?
said we could do the show, but he didn't order any concession stands. So we sent out and got a barbecue and sodas, and we're cooking them for the kids.
Right.
Like $1 for a hot dog, $1 for sodas.
Sure.
And we kept going. We went through that, and then we were and then we had to drive down to.
Let me back up. You got to Colorado. The guy had canceled the show or forgot about it.
Yeah,
but then said you could still do the show. Were the tickets sold? I mean, there's a little
there was
splaining
a
to
few
do there,
tickets
Lucy.
sold. He did send someone out to kind of help us, or like it was kind of on, kind of off. He was pissed. It didn't sell tickets. He was going to lose money.
Right.
But we pulled it off.
Okay.
But now we had to drive. We had to drive all the way down to Dallas, Texas. And this was when they really thought they canceled the show. A guy named Danny Eaton, who later became a big supporter of mine. But that first year, Lollapalooza was just down the street that same weekend. And Lollapalooza was still doing very well. It was a touring festival. And we have some great recollections of this, and I'd love to get a couple people's perspective on that first show. Let's hear from Gus.
I remember Dallas, the bomb factory. Because remember there was a problem with the venues in Dallas, and we moved to a smaller one or something.
That came up with Chris. He said, I remember the bomb factory. We showed up, and you said, well, okay, we're going to set up the show. There's Lollapalooza was playing down the road. They were playing like in San Antonio, right near, not too far. And the promoter was like, oh, God, I thought I canceled you guys. And I said, well, we're going to set up the show. And I think we tore down all the fences. There was only a little bit of fence around the lot. And we ended up doing a show for all the homeless people. And they were all hanging out with their shopping carts and hanging out and got a punk rock show. Not only Gus had recollection, everyone came up. And Jennifer had a great recollection of that first show at the Bomb Factory. The promoter thought he canceled the show, kind of.
Well, didn't that also happen something in San Antonio, Texas?
Dallas, the deep
was
element
it Dallas?
At the Bomb Factory. we
were just showing up, and no one had the same vision that you had for how it was going to run. We're going to roll in at night. We're going to set up our stages, do all this stuff. No one understood it. The venues didn't understand it.
We couldn't even go into the venue. So we set up in the parking lot. I took down there was a little bit of fence around the parking lot, and we just let all the homeless people come in. And
So these are memorable stops. So when you say memorable, not necessarily memorable good.
I don't think people remember. That's the problem. Sometimes we don't remember the good. We just remember those moments like when you question, what am I doing here? I'm at home, making a pretty good living, running shows for Golden Voice, make it a decent living. And here I am, like, out there, like, just every day
and
going.
When you think about that, you have a small child at home and a wife, and you must have been questioning yourself in this first year.
Oh, absolutely.
Every stop.
Every day, just going, oh, my God, this is just, I've always been that kind of person that you just can't
keep going.
You can't settle. You can't settle. And even at this point, why I'm sitting here talking to you, you just can't. So you got to keep moving forward, I tell my students all the time that the only thing you run out of life is time.
It's true.
Before we leave, I have a clip, I'd like to, from Tazy, who had Ska Parade. And we made it the whole summer. We got done.
Right.
And the last show was at Irvine Meadows.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Irvine Meadows. It was in the concourse, the little food circle at Irvine Meadows.
This first year, it was at Irvine Meadows concourse behind the parking lot near the dumpster.
Exactly. So Tazy had something to add to this, to close out this episode.
We went in along with two other record labels to do a booth at the Warped Tour at Irvine Meadows in 95. And so it was Dancehall Crashers record label called 510 Records. And it was the record label that I work with called Way Cool Music. And the third one was this other record label called Trauma Records, which was the home of a new band that was coming out of there called No Doubt. And I found a photo from that day. And it's a very significant day for me because, I don't know, can you see that?
Oh, yes, I can. Right there. Way Cool Music. I remember Way Cool Music. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, this is my experience on the first Warped Tour in the summer of 95. And we had a booth. And the biggest thing that happened to me that day was this is the day that they gave me the full cassette of Tragic Kingdom to play on Ska Parade. So after the show, they gave me the cassette, and I was able to debut more songs on my program. And I have to say thank you so much, Kevin, because to part of this was just amazing and really added something. Warped Tour was a family. I don't know how else to put it. And we were a bunch of misfits who always got together every year, and it was just glorious. I'm just so thrilled to be part of that.
That's the show. That's what I think I remember seeing. It was amazing. So it was almost a moment of complete debauchery and it was like planned debauchery.
Well,
it turned out to be fantastic. Even the dog jumped on stage and chimed in. It was like watching a car accident.
Yeah.
That turned out to be a perfect triple
Well,
lux.
and that's kind of what first Warped Tour was. It was a slow moving train wreck, but
that hit the point. You know,
Well,
it's a slow moving that.
it showed people, enough people saw it to give me a second chance.
Yeah.
That was the biggest part about all of that. It was, and I always tell people it was like the 12 and a half years that I put in before that,
Right.
that allowed this, and then people took a hard look at it, and we were kind of on our way. With that being, that was the first year. There are so many people that were involved in that first year. We made it through the first year. We learned a lot that we took into the future years. But a lot of people don't really kind of know where a lot of this was. So I thought we'd cover that in the first year, the first episode.
Did
of
you
my work.
think at the end of that Irvine Meadow tour, when you had finished it up, you went home, you just slept for 3 days?
No, I didn't.
Did you imagine
I
that
was
the
back,
next 20
I was back working in a club the next morning,
Oh
pretty
my
much.
God.
Yeah, I mean, I think unloaded the trucks. I started working again in the clubs because I didn't have any money. We were pretty broke, and I know I paid our mortgage. We had a very cheap mortgage, and I paid it out of the coin jar one year pretty much to get us to that thing. And we'll talk later on in different episodes about how we integrated sponsors, how Vans got involved. We're going to talk about how, some of the things we learned about integrating brands into to music, and
Right.
because we were kind of cutting our teeth on that. But the next episode is going to be all about food.
Yeah.
That first year, the lack of food, the excess of heckler brow.
The fact that you didn't get sued because you didn't feed anybody?
No, you don't get sued for not feeding anyone, but I did get sued that first year, which we'll talk about at one point, about legal problems, about
Yeah, that was the fun
tour
stuff.
and forcing it. But with that, as being said, that's been a great, our first episode. We'll be working on it constantly to make it better.
We'll make it better and better and better.
Yeah, we'll make it better and better. And, would love to, thank all our guests and thank you to the first listeners. We appreciate your feedback and comments. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, Apple to get yourself an interview and be on the show. Follow @MyWarpedLife. Follow our Patreon for full interviews. Text us at 818-863-6445. Before we leave tonight, I'd like to thank my co-host, Tony Aradia, my producers, Xavier Muster-Shorts Bradley and Vivian Wang. Music by Diego Aratia. Creatives by Carly, Lost in the Northwest, Webster, and Sierra Lyman. Social media by Beata, Shem Tov, and by family. They know who they are. And now for a little outro music, Diego.